So, welcome to this UCL lunchtime lecture. I'm Mark Maslin. I'm a professor of... Actually, that's quite difficult to actually tell you because, unfortunately, I fiddle with so many things. So, I work on climate change in the past and the future. I look at the Anthropocene. And today, I'm going to be talking about one of my passions, which is human evolution. Because I've always been fascinated when looking out at a sea of undergraduates at UCL, why do they think they're so smart? Okay? Subtly different there about, are they really smart? So what I'm going to try to do in half an hour is take you through our journey from small-brained, bipedal, all the way to large brain, and hopefully leave you with lots and lots of questions unanswered, so shamelessly plugging my book, so you then have to go and find the answers in there, okay? So, where are we going to start off? So our first ancestor is thought to be this creature who has been found about 6 to 7 million years ago in Chad. Gorilla-like face, and therefore, why do we think it's anything to do with us, hominins? The reason being is because the skull has a hole at the base of it. So if you pick up any of these skulls, the great thing is the hole at the bottom where the base of the spine goes in is near the middle. And that means it was trying to balance it upright, okay? Because what you're doing when you're walking around is your back, and most of you probably have backache like I do permanently. The reason being is you are taking a large, round, spherical object which weighs a huge amount and sticking it on your backbone and trying to balance it. Now, of course, that's what humans do, so that means we're bipedal, whereas if you look at chimpanzees, the hole that they have is much further to the back because they spend most of their time on all fours. So that evidence of bipedalism means that gorilla-like creature in Chad, which probably lived in this sort of conditions, was walking upright. Great. However, and this is, by the way, why I don't go and collect fossils, this is the conditions this fossil was collected in. So Chad is no longer this wonderful sort of like forest, tropical forest. It is a desert. And this is a good day, by the way. Most of the time, there is just sandstorms going through, okay? And this is an expedition to actually find these fossils. So, something really important has happened in East Africa to change all of that. And so this is the East African Rift Valley, starts in the middle of the Red Sea in a triple junction, and then it slowly has worked its way down through East Africa, down all the way to Mozambique. And this has occurred from about 20 million years ago, first uplift in Ethiopia, all the way down to about 1 million years when it gets down to Mozambique. So, why is this so important? Well, it forms grabens. So these are mountain ranges which basically are uplifted. So you have a sharp edge, and then you have a long sloping ridge on either side. And this changes. So this is Kenya. This is formation about 5 million years ago. And I wanted to try and give you some scaling for this. So this is a little bit of tectonics. This is just a minor movement that occurred in Kenya about 1 million years ago. And it doesn't look that big, except that's my 4x4, okay? So this is just a minor bit of thrusting that went on. So the amount of movement that has occurred in Ethiopia through down to Mozambique is huge. But I'm a geographer, so why do I care about that? Well, I want to know what actually made us walk upright. Why is it important for us to have gone away from the chimpanzee approach and decided this is a really good idea? And if you think about it, it's not a particularly good idea because our children take about a year to work out how to actually balance and walk, whereas horses, when they get born, give them a couple of hours and they're running around. So there's a whole year of vulnerability that bipedalism sets up. So, 20 million years ago, East Africa was relatively flat, and then there's this hot spot. So magma comes up and starts to heat up the crust. Of course, then that means you get some bulging, and then you get this rift valley opening up. Now, geologists will tell you all complicated things about how hotspots work, etc. However, I'm unfortunately not that smart, so I have to use my baking analogy. So, can I ask, any of you like the British Bake Off? Yeah, excellent. Right. So I have illusions that I may one day be on that program. So, of course, I'm going to bake you an apple pie. So I get the sauce in the pan. Of course, I'm using an American recipe, so it doesn't have many apples in it. It's mainly sauce. So that's the magma. I then put over the actual sort of pastry over the top. You know, it's slightly domed. Okay, fine. And then I put it in the oven. Great. So, of course, apple sauce heats up, it expands, it starts to bubble, and of course, you get this beautiful doming effect. That's Ethiopia. Beautiful doming effect. Except as I had this slight problem. I'm not a very good cook, so of course, I leave it in there too long. So what happens is it expands too much, it cracks down the middle, and out comes all of this magma. Sorry, apple sauce. So the Rift Valley is actually just a really bad baked apple pie, okay? And that's what happens. And the really interesting thing that I want to point out is the Rift Valley is not a valley. It is a hanging valley 1,000 meters above sea level with two huge mountain ranges either side, which go up to 4 kilometers. So this must have had some effect on climate. I'm a geographer, it must have. Right, so interestingly enough, East Africa used to get rainfall from the Congo and from the Indian Ocean. 10 million years ago, even with uplift, that still occurs. But 5 million years ago, these mountains are so large that as the air rises, it cools down, all the moisture then runs out as rain, so there isn't anything getting into the middle. So you get this dry, arid plateau. And this is the classical view. And interestingly enough, this goes all the way back to Darwin. And we're in the Darwin lecture theatre. He suggested that we were walking the plains of Africa, the Savannah Hypothesis. So, okay, chimpanzees. Excellent, you know, they're incredibly well adapted to a forest environment. Perfect. And then we have our early ancestors like Ardipithecus ramidus about 4.4 million years ago, who are perfectly adapted to bipedalism and the plains of Africa. Oh. Now, this is the species that's changed our view. So the Savannah Hypothesis was great. It's easy. We're just walking around the plains. We had to get between food sources. But look at Ardipithecus. Ardipithecus is really interesting as a fossil because it has long bipedal legs, so it could walk long distances. But look at those arms. Those arms and those hands say trees. Okay? So we're now thinking that we're reversing that idea that being about the plains is actually, it's the ability to stay in the trees, to be able to move between the trees, which is so important, and then on the ground. Because mountains do not create savannas. Okay? If you go to East Africa and you go up and down the Rift Valley now, the reason why it looks like a savanna is because of goats and other animals grazing. What mountains do is they fragment vegetation. So if you go to Ethiopia now, you can go from cloud rainforest down to arid desert in less than 50 kilometers. That fragmentation of the vegetation and food sources means, as an organism, you need to be able to move between those food sources. And if you start as a hominid or a primate, walking upright is a really efficient way of doing it. And I do try to suggest to my undergraduates that all of them can walk all day if forced to, okay? So we are very efficient at that movement. But guess what? I'm not interested in that. So, okay, so that's Lucy. So this is Lucy, by the way. Hello, Lucy. So Lucy, bipedal ape, about this size, and actually slightly smarter than chimpanzee, but not much, okay? Right. But what I'm interested in is when I look out at you lot is, why do you have such a large head and such a big brain? That's the thing that obsessed me, because that's a chimpanzee, that's a human brain. Huge, huge difference. So why is that? Oh, yes. Also, all of you have tried to kill your mother. Okay? Hey, haven't we all? We can confess this, okay? Because childbirth for humans is really problematic. It's very dangerous for the infant and for the mother. Okay? So therefore, having a very large head and being very smart must have some really important evolutionary advantages over everybody else. And the reason I'll give you this, so if we take Lucy, and I apologize for you of the weak distribution, I am now chimpanzee, female. Yeah, work with me, okay? Right, okay? I'm going to give birth, okay? So the baby's head is facing outwards towards you, and it locks into my pelvis. Okay? I then give birth, the face comes up, I pick it up, put it to my breast, and I wander off, okay? That's the first one. So, we know from hip bones, from Australopithecus africanus, that actually slightly bigger head, so the actual head has to go in, clicks once, sideways, and is born sideways. So you pick up the head, swing it around, put it to your breast, move on. Oh, now we have humans, okay? So, I say this in the politest way, all of you were born facing your mother's bottom, okay? So, because what happens with the human hip, because your head is so big, it goes in, it locks again, and oh, you're facing the wrong way. So, right, what do? Do I grab it round here? Do I grab it round here? How do I get it to my breast? Oh, and then I've got this umbilical cord wrapped around my leg. So human birth, A, you've got the two lockings, and secondly, you've got the how do you actually get the baby up from there is problematic. Okay? Yes, my wife has not forgiven me for both my daughters, okay? So I'm aware of the problem. So there must be something really important about getting a bigger head and a bigger brain. This is all the data we have on skulls. So these are people that have found skulls, they've measured the actual size of it inside. And so so this is Ardipithecus ramidus that I showed you with the long arms, bipedal, and the bottom line there is about what a chimpanzee is. So look, for about 2.5 million years, we're slightly smarter than chimpanzee, but not much. And then suddenly, about 2 million years ago, we have a jump up. Homo erectus. This is Homo erectus. This is Australopithecus africanus. And yes, you can fondle them after the lecture, okay? Because I do. So look at the difference. And I'm also going to wax lyrical about Homo erectus because it really should be the start of our lineage. This is Homo habilis, which is dated about 2.4 million years. And the only reason this became Homo was because it was found with stone tools, and in the late 1960s, this was the great leap forward. Stone tools are the most important thing. This shows cognitive difference to animals. Except now, we know that lots of animals use tools, and we also have, and I'm so pleased they finally published it, in Tucana, we have stone tools dated at 3.4 million years, which is about the same time as they were running around. So it is, stone tools are pre-Homo. So, and then there's another leap up, about 1 million years, to Homo heidelbergensis. So we now have big jumps in brain capacity. Now, why? So, people like simple stories. So in 1995, a colleague of mine published a paper called the Aridity Hypothesis, and this is dust literally seen from space blowing off the Sahara. And what he did was he went to the ocean cores in the Indian and Atlantic Ocean and just measured the dust. He went, look, here's the dust record for the last 4 million years. There's the big ice ages up the top. And then also he looked at the carbon isotopes of the soils in East Africa. And what they show is there is a slow trend towards drier conditions. Okay. And what he said was, oh, look, 2.6, evolution of Homo habilis, 1.7 Homo erectus, 1 million years, Heidelbergensis. It's easy. What happens is Africa gets drier, we get stressed, we get smarter, it gets drier, we get smarter. Great. Except the only problem is, if you look at that data, doesn't seem to be any thresholds in there or any trends or anything like that, even if you've had a lot to drink. Now, I have to say, Martin Trout, my colleague in Germany, actually did it properly with stats and things like that, and fitting things and things like that, and I just went, great. And guess what? There's no trends in this. So for 10 years, 1995 to 2005, the whole of paleoanthropology was built on a myth of data that didn't have any steps in it. Right. So I started my career as a paleoceanographer, working on deep sea sediments. So I knew having a sediment from the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean tells you nothing about the Rift Valley, which we're interested in. So Martin said to me, do you want to do some proper research? And I went, yeah. So this is how you do field work in East Africa in the 21st century. On the top left is your transport that takes you to the site, and therefore we base our camp on the rift shoulder because you have shade, slightly cooler conditions, access to water, etc. And then you use what I call the taxi. That's a helicopter, and you have that based on the rift shoulder, and then you fly in and out of the Rift Valley for your site. So the great thing is, of course, you're in camp, I'm showing the pictures for my daughters of, this is the hole where we go to the toilet. I love that. And the thing is, the camp can always find, I have no idea how they do it, they always find that stick that has this beautiful sticky out bit for the toilet roll. Just anywhere they are, there's always that stick that they can find. So the interesting thing is, of course, you get up at 6:30, you have breakfast, and as soon as it's light, as soon as the sun pokes over the horizon, you can get in a taxi and get into the Rift Valley. So that means at 7:30 in the morning, you are working on your first site. Now, of course, you will go to one site, and you've done this from previous pieces of work, you've scanned it with satellite data, etc., and you get there, and suddenly you look at each other and go, this was a stupid idea. Why are we here? There's no sediments. Right. Taxi, can you move us? And so you can get so much work done. The other great thing is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when it's hit 44 degrees in the Rift Valley, you go, I'm going back to my lab now to look at the data. Please get me out. So this is a student that we left out there. No. And on his back, he has a differential GPS. So what he's doing is mapping this. This is a wave-cut platform. So remember that, a wave-cut platform in the middle of a desert. So here we have professors hiding underneath an umbrella because it's hot, and this is a lake sediment that's been uplifted. So I'm obsessed with lakes. So we know, going through the whole of the Rift Valley, that there are lakes that currently exist and have existed in the past, but there's also these wonderful paleo lakes which you can go and see and sample. And the great thing about paleoanthropology is each group works in their own little area. They won't let you come into that area if you work with somebody else, and they won't let you in if you aren't friendly towards them. So they never compare data with each other's sites. So it's brilliant. So we just came in and basically worked on all of them. So this is what an ancient lake sediment looks like in East Africa. Huge white sediment. Looks like the white cliffs of Dover. However, it's not made of calcium carbonate. It's made of diatomites, which are incredibly small sort of algae-like creatures which photosynthesize. And the great thing is that by looking at the species, you can tell what sort of lake it is. So this lake here, and as you can see how arid it is, was a lake that was pure fresh water at least 300 meters deep. So this starts to bring a picture that African climate has changed very, very markedly in the past. And so I put all this data together. So on the top is, looking for the last 5 million years, is the lake basins. So there are about 7 major lake basins all the way in East Africa you can put together. And when somebody in the literature said, oh, I found a lake and I dated it, or we had found a lake and dated it, I put it together. So what I did was I said, I trust everybody. I'm not even going to analyze their data. I'm going to assume they've tried to do the best science they can, and I'm going to put it all together, and hopefully all the errors will just smear out. The great thing is, if you see, it's cyclic. You have these deep freshwater lakes that appear about 4.5 million years ago, and then slowly through. The middle one is hominin diversity, which is probably the most controversial thing in paleoanthropology because people like to name things. So there are two groups. The splitters, which basically split everything into lots of different species, and the lumpers that go, oh no, they're all the same species. Doesn't matter. What's interesting is wherever you put yourself, you get the same sort of shape of the graph. And the key thing is something really weird goes on about 2 million years ago. Because that's when you have brain expansion. It's also where you have increased diversity. There were possibly up to 6 hominins, 6 of these, running around in the same region, competing with each other and possibly even interbreeding. We also have, that's the same time of the lakes. So is this going to be a link? And then when we get to Heidelbergensis, that's also a period of lots of lakes. The other thing I'd like to point out before I move on is, if you notice the 6, during this lake phase, and I'm going to talk about this lake phases in more detail, by the end of this lake phase, there's only 1 species. So it's really interesting that we start off with this, wow, suddenly evolution goes mad, we have 6 different versions, and then, oh, we only have Homo erectus by the end. It's a mystery. I have no idea what happened. I don't know what he did or she did. Right. So, of course, did human evolution occur when it was lush and wet by the side of lakes? Is Peter completely wrong? Was there nothing to do with dust at all? Is it there with drinking cocktails going, yeah, I'm going to get some smarter today. I think I need a bigger brain. Do you know what the wonderful thing about science is? It's a bit more complicated. And more interesting. So, it seems that these lakes aren't there all the time. They're ephemeral. And so this is a beautiful piece of work from Kenya for Baringo, and it shows that there are 5 lake phases. So you can walk across the whole landscape, and John Kingston's mapped it all out, and you can find these 10-meter deep lake sediments, and you can walk up the geological section, and they are then on top of each other. 5 of them. And Alan dated them with argon using sort of beautiful volcanic phenocrysts, and showed that they were about 20,000 years apart. As soon as he said that to me, my alarm bells, oh, I know that. I know what 20,000 years mean. It's because the Earth's climate is controlled by wobbles. Okay? So the great ice ages are due to the wobbles of the Earth's orbit around the sun. However, in the tropics, the one that is most important is precession. And the way to think about precession is we're spinning on our axis, okay, once every day. However, if you do a spinning top like that, and the thing is it's getting really hard to explain this to undergraduates, they're looking at me going, what's a spinning top? I'm going to have to buy one of those toys, you know, one of those retro toys to actually go, this is a Victorian spinning top, I had it as a child, you know. Okay, pump it up. If you pump it up, the really interesting thing, unless it's a BMW advert, actually the actual axis wobbles round, much slower. On a giant scale, that's exactly what happens to the Earth, is that the spinning, everyday spinning, basically wobbles the axis of the Earth round. That doesn't really have much effect, apart from it changes where the seasons are. So if we have a look at today, December is actually slightly closer to the sun, okay? And that's because of the shape is an ellipse. Now, of course, Decembers aren't warm, even because that's all about the tilt of the Earth, but they're slightly warmer than they could be. If we then go back 11,000 years ago, the summers are closer and the winters are slightly further away, so of course you have colder summers. So, precession, that wobble, can change the seasonality. And the thing about seasonality is in the tropics, that controls rainfall. So in Kenya, you have 2 wet seasons, one in about March and one in about October, and 2 dry seasons. You change the length and the intensity of those, and you can do this to the environment. You can go from incredibly lush to incredibly dry. This is actually in a year, okay? So imagine doing this on a geological timescale. And you should be deeply cynical and go, I don't believe you, Mark. Where's the evidence for this? So this is, you know that poor student I left on a wave cut platform? Well, this white line, so I can't do it. So the little circle in the middle, that white circle, that's the island we were standing on, okay? And we made him go around much of this area. And this is the most recent shoreline of the lake. So this was only 9,000 years ago that this lake was there. It disappeared about 6,500 years ago and has reduced down to Lake Legipi, which is about 3 meters deep. And I'm really sorry, it's the most stinkiest, disgusting alkaline lake on the planet. Just flying over in the helicopter, it makes you sort of go, ugh. So yeah. So we've gone from deep freshwater lake, 300 meters deep, to that stink of a cesspit. This is what he was looking at. So when he was doing it with the GPS, he was looking at this. This is the short part of the island across hyper-arid dunes, and that's the paleo shoreline. Just to give you some idea of the quantity of water that's there, okay? Also, you may notice that the sand dunes have these strange stripes on them. Before you panic, it's not because I found a new giant sandworm that lives in Kenya secretly. I asked the helicopter pilot what was causing them, and he went, yeah, Mark, yes. Well, occasionally rich kids from Nairobi book us, and we fly them up here, and they jump out and do sandboarding. So those are anthropogenic sandboarding signs, okay? So, these orbital parameters are part of the natural system. So if you look at the last 8 million years, so we've got precession, that's the 20,000 year one. We've got eccentricity, which is the shape that goes from a circle to an ellipse. So of course, when you have a circle, where the seasons are have no effect. So it has a really a big influence. And then you have obliquity, which is the tilt, which is this wobble up and down, which you don't need to know about, because you can come back and hear my Ice Age talk perhaps in another time. But up the top is insolation. So insolation is the amount of sun's energy you get at the surface. So the way I sum it up is, if I had an undergraduate that really annoyed me, oh, there's quite a few of those, and I had a time machine, don't have one of those, then what I do is give them a lux meter to measure the sunlight, and if I sent them back in time for every March for the last 8 million years, that's what you would get. Because the amount of sun's energy varies because of the place on the cycle that the Earth is, because of the wobbles of those seasons. Okay? Now, luckily, we don't have to do that. We have physicists to do all the wonderful calculations of gravity. But it means that without changing anything else, you can vary the rainfall patterns in the tropics by a huge amount. So interestingly enough, I work on Amazonia, and one of the ideas about why there's so much diversity is because there's been no major uplift. It's because of this. Every 20,000 years, you get a massive change in rainfall. Now, this led us to really look at these lakes in detail, because we wanted to know, okay, so it's wet and dry. Okay, we've got these two extremes. But what about the transitions between the two? So if we start over on the right-hand side, you have incredibly dry conditions like you do today. Low resources, very, very stressful. As Peter Dominical quite rightly said, this sort of aridity hypothesis. So, this is where this skull comes in. So this is the robusti. So the robusti, interestingly enough, their brain has shrunk, okay? This is the ancestor, this is the robusti. And the reason being is because it needs this huge ridge on the top of the head to hold the muscles for the jaw. This jaw can eat anything, tubers, nuts, anything that they can get hold of. And so this is almost an adaptation to, oh, this is stressful, I can eat anything, to keep the whole system going, okay? So that's that. We then have this threshold. So in the geological record in East Africa, what's really odd is you just go, there's a lake. And literally they just start. The lake sediments just start. There's no sort of pause, there's no sort of mixing or anything, they just start. At first I was like worried about this until I realized that actually that works with climatology. Because we have at the moment very arid conditions in East Africa. You put any water on that system, that changes the lapse rate and the evaporation, so that reduces that. You then start to have trees that transpire, which then put more moisture into the atmosphere. That aridity and that evaporation is removed very, very quickly. So lakes, if you start them, grow very, very quickly. You then have that period of 8,000 years where there's lots and lots of resources, which also means lots of competition. So evolutionists call it Red Queen, where basically species compete and perhaps a few don't quite survive that competition. Now, the most interesting bit is the last bit, where you have about 2,000 years. The lakes do not want to go. So when there's a slight drying, they resist, they have feedbacks, and it's come, go, come, go, come, go for about 2,000 years. And then finally, there's not enough rainfall to keep them at all. This is where Rick Potts thinks Homo erectus comes in. He argues that this brain is about being flexible and adaptive. It's about that ability for us to actually think in a group to think out problems. So, oh, the lake's retreated today and this year, where will we get food? How are we actually going to do it? So that's where he would put it. And for each of these pulses, about 2 million and 1 million years, you get 5 of these cycles hitting our ancestors, and then it all calms down. So we have these pulses of evolution that occur. So I'm a big fan of Homo erectus, as you can probably tell, because everything changes. Everything changes. So you get bigger brain, okay? But you also get a growth plateau. So all of you can remember your childhood when you actually grew, and then you stopped. And it was really annoying, especially if you were a boy, because the girls started to get bigger than you. And then you don't grow for about 5 years. And then suddenly, boom, you accelerate up about start of secondary school, perhaps the second year in secondary school, you start to grow. We know from the teeth and the lines on the teeth, the growth lines, that Homo erectus is the first hominin who has that growth plateau. It also has wonderful adaptation, so we can throw spears and throw things. It also is the one that allows us to have lots of adaptations for long-distance running. Okay? You may not believe this, but all of you are adapted to long-distance running. And actually, give me 6 months with you and we'll probably get you to do a marathon, okay? You have everything in you, okay? You've seen the 90-year-olds doing it. We are adapted. The other really weird thing is, if you've ever watched runners, when people walk, and I'll do a bit of walking, you'll notice my head actually goes up and down, like this, like a sine wave, okay? Because basically walking is just falling comfortably, okay? Fall, fall, up and down. When you see anyone run, their eyes do not move. So if you look at sprinters, long-distance runner, their head, everything else is like a spring. Their head and their eyes stay there. This is when we cease to be a victim or prey. We started to become a predator. Okay? Right. So why? Why do we have a bigger brain? So I can show you lots about the environment, say, oh, the environment did this, it did this. But then there's conjecture. How do you actually get from that? So the social brain hypothesis says, actually, having a big brain means that we can work and function in very large groups in a really efficient way. And guess what? There's 7.6 billion of us, and basically we are the apex predator on the planet, and we have affected almost every single form of life on this planet. So tick, yes, okay, so it does seem to work. So, but why? How do we get there? There must have been some sexual selection. So people have suggested the expensive brain hypothesis, because as I said, one, big brains always try to kill your mother, okay? That's the first thing. Secondly, it goes wrong a lot of the time, okay? We know that. Thirdly, we also know that it takes a lot of calories. We don't notice that because we have such a calorie-rich diet, but it does take a lot of calories. So if we look at the cognitive and positive benefits, social. If you're in a group of about 150, the idea that a predator is going to go and take one of you, most predators are going to go, yeah, I don't like them. They're screaming and they're shouting and they're waving fire in my face. And there's 150 of them. I'm going to go for the gazelle. Okay? So firstly, protection. Secondly, allomaternal care. Women need help with childbirth. So the more friends that they can associate with, more relatives that they can incorporate into their social grouping, means they have more people who are going to help them. You then have stabilization of food, because it doesn't matter who brings in the food, as long as there's food, because you can share it. Okay? Now, of course, that means you need people to actually control that sharing, whereby you really want people that are incredibly charming and influential, who may not be the strongest, the fastest, or the toughest, but they're really good at going, right, you go and get the nuts, you go and kill the cheetah, you go and get the other food, okay, and then I'm going to share it all out. Okay? Strangely enough, those people are really attractive to other mates. It's like, oh, forget the one with the muscles, I'm going for the one with the brains because they've got all the food. Okay? So there is a real interesting, both sides, sexual selection for smart women and smart men to actually start this whole thing rolling. And group size. If you do the size of the brain and you look at the neocortex, neocortex seems to be related to group size within primates and mammals. Though, like all science, that's deeply controversial, and people have turned around and said, absolutely not, it's all about food. But let's just go with the size. So it seems that if you do that, Homo sapiens, i.e. us, have a group size of about 150. Now, the interesting thing is this maps onto lots of things. Church of England congregations are about 150. Your Christmas card list, about 150. Medieval villages, about 150. Oh, but if you don't have 150, obviously you don't have enough friends. Now, everybody, particularly the new generation, turns around and says, oh, no, I have more friends than that. No, I have much more friends than that because I have social media. Studies of social media, proper scientific ones, shows that the number of people you interact with on a meaningful basis that you can predict who, what, and how they are, not just using sort of some standard stereotype, is, strange enough, 150. So, I'm going to leave you on a bit of a ledge because I'm going to say what we think is that ability to work in teams, that ability to actually share food, the ability to actually go beyond kin relationships and actually form friendship bonds which are sometimes much more powerful than, oh, that's my brother, okay, or that's my sister. That ability has allowed us to work very, very effectively in teams, and so it's also, by the way, I hate to point out, the problem with being human is incredibly stressful because, of course, keeping track of all those people, and those are your friends and enemies and your competitors. And by the way, being a scientist is even worse because they could be anywhere in the world writing papers that you don't know about, so it can be very stressful. Sorry. So I'm going to leave you with the thought that it is the changing landscape of East Africa, the huge uplift of the mountains that fragmented the landscape, that turned it from a riverine to a lake-based environment. You then have these wobbles, or as I call them, celestial mechanics, wobbles around the sun, which then mean these lakes then appeared and disappeared for short, intense periods of time, which meant that we either decided to eat our way out or think our way out. And the selection pressures for the big brain, I would suggest, is all about how social we are. And my last point is, my undergraduates, bless them, they think they're really, really smart because they can know what a split infinitive is and do a differential equation. However, I would tell them, you grab anybody off the street, they will be watching soap operas, probably about 5. They will know the ethical and moral dilemmas of every single character because that's why we're so smart. We know who's cheating on us, why they're cheating on us, and how we can make sure that they don't cheat on us again, and how we can make sure they're on our side, and we get Grant Mitchell. Okay? So again, that's why you have a very big brain and are constantly stressed like me. Thank you very much. So we have time for some quick questions. Any questions? Yes? Do you want to? There's a microphone coming down.
It's a big Earth. So why did all this happen in Africa? Why didn't it happen in the Far East? Don't they have rift valleys and all the conditions that you've...
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, why did it happen in Africa, not the Middle East? So I would argue 2 reasons. One, you had the right primates in Africa at that time, because you have to have something for evolution to work on. Second thing is, the changes in environment from being flat rainforest to huge mountains with cloud forests, with desert, with wetlands and all of that, such a huge change that didn't happen in the Middle East. Okay? The Middle East didn't have such a huge fragmentation. I also think that's important is the lakes. The lakes, meaning that instead of having a riverine type environment, you had lakes. And lakes, therefore, are a center of food and production, but also they can easily come and go, whereas rivers have more of a constant because they have a much larger catchment area. On top of that, I think that there is a key thing, which is there was competition. I think because evolution started with these sort of organisms, and please don't get me wrong, Lucy was incredibly successful. I mean, we found her in Chad all the way down through sort of East Africa into South Africa. So this was a continent-wide organism that actually was highly successful. So I would say it's that just huge combinations of everything changes. Yes?
Under what circumstances did these the different types of humanoids meet and interbreed?
Right, so the really interesting thing is, when did these meet and how do they interbreed? Now, I can't tell you whether these actually met up. But what's really interesting is the genetic work that's been going on with Neanderthals and early humans shows us that calling these separate species is problematic because we now know that Neanderthals and humans were interbreeding. So my view is that we don't have this wonderful linear tree of this evolved to this to evolve. No, what we have is a bush. And when those 6 species were running around at the same time, I'm sure there were more, I think they were interbreeding, I think they were killing each other, I think they were outcompeting each other. I think it was absolutely everything happening at the same time. And therefore, we have a bit of all these, just like some of us have bits of Neanderthal, some of us have bits of Devensian in our genetic DNA. Any other? One more quick question. Preferably not the killer one. Over there, sorry, there's one. Do you want to? Oh.
Hi, I'm no expert in any of this stuff at all, but how does it make any sense if, like in terms of evolution, if every time a child is born, it could potentially kill its mother because of the size of its head? I simply don't understand how that would lead, I guess, our species to become the apex predator if that risk was apparent every time someone gave birth.
So evolution is all about the survivors. So evolution is all about death. It's all about the failures. So the interesting thing is every single person in this room should applaud themselves because they are a survivor. Not only that, every single ancestor, going all the way back to the bacteria, has been a survivor. Okay? So it's an incredible journey of 4 billion years that you have come to this point to hear me waffle. So, but the key thing there is that it's about the balancing. So there's a balancing between the hip size and the size of the child at birth. And so what's happened is the perfect balance, or the best balance, has actually occurred, and those have actually moved forward. So you'll see that even with chimpanzees and other natural animals, there is large amounts of death due to sort of predation and also sort of just stillbirth. I think it's every chimpanzee's first baby, because they have children very young, is stillborn. Okay? So it's that approach. So of course we're looking at it going, well, I don't understand why it's so problematic. It was never problematic for us because we're the survivors. And if you think about it, many women can have, if they wish to, 8, 9, 10 babies within their fertile range. And men, of course, yes, think Charlie Chaplin. We can keep babies coming out until we're in our 80s and 90s, if we want to. So I think that's it. It's about we're seeing the survivors, not who's actually failed the race. And the key thing is, if you're a survivor and you've got a big brain and you go, oh, I've got lots of food and I'm feeding you, feeding you, feeding you, feeding you, that's highly successful, you're going to make sure that your genetics are passed on and passed on. Right, thank you very much, and I'm sure you've got better places to go.